Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another weekly reading from the tarot. I would like to say I'm getting less awkward as I do these videos, but that's just not in my nature. I will, however, try to look at the camera this time instead of myself, so that might improve your viewer experience. So each week I pull 3 cards from the tarot, and I use the Charmin Castelli Tarot, which is a westernized, simplified version of the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck. And this would be a good time to just reiterate a disclaimer here that I'm a white person, in case you hadn't noticed. And one of my goals, obviously, as someone who does divination and tarot reading and creates oracle decks and tools for divination, is not to appropriate or whitewash or marginalize cultures from whom I and other practitioners have taken the elements of our practice. So, for example, tarot, I don't know the full extensive history off the top of my head to say, but it's important to acknowledge that marginalized groups, such as, for example, the Romani people, who originated a lot of the ways that we use cartomancy, card reading, for divination in their culture, were actually marginalized, denied access to an appropriate life because of discrimination due to those practices. So it's irresponsible to come onto any platform and pretend that the work that we do with the tarot or with the reading of any kind of cards exists in a vacuum, or that it originated somehow in Western culture, when in fact it has a much more complex history that does tie to the past and ongoing oppression of different ethnic peoples. So that's something I encourage you to find out more about if you're getting into tarot or getting into oracle card reading, is to really learn about the history of these spiritual practices and the fact that they did not necessarily originate in Western culture. Many times they are whitewashed and presented as though they are a Western tradition, and these origins from marginalized groups are erased. And what that does is continue the erasure of a people who have been persecuted throughout history for a practice that then we, as a white person, may potentially profit from. So this is just one example of how white supremacy perpetuates itself in the popular culture. And as much as I am able to, I want to continue to point out those times when my practice intersects with areas of white supremacy and the oppressive patriarchal culture that continues to marginalize groups for practicing their indigenous traditions, while still taking those indigenous traditions and marketing them and profiting off of them. So that being said, there's a disclaimer. So if you're still with me, we'll read some cards, but I did want to, that does actually lead me into the most recent oracle deck I created, the Airmail Oracle. And one of the reasons I specifically, or one of the factors I really wanted to take into account when creating this deck, is the fact that I tried not to pull too much from actual artifacts that were not of my personal lineage. I kind of wanted to create a deck for white people to do ancestral work with their white ancestors with whom there are many problems. I mean, for example, within 3 generations of myself, there are slaveholding families that were fighting for the South in the Civil War. So there's a connection to those problematic aspects of whiteness in these cards. There's no way to separate that. But what I have tried to do is not appropriate other cultures in the creation of this deck. So this is a deck for use with my ancestors, from my ancestors, to with a social justice framework. So I want to use this deck and other decks like it to gain a deeper awareness and understanding of my role in the modern world and how I can heal generational trauma, not perpetuate stereotypes, not perpetuate white supremacy and things like that. So Well, we're 5 minutes in and I have not pulled any cards, but that's something that was weighing heavy on my heart. And I did want to make sure to address that before we just jumped right in. So I hope I articulated it in a way that is accessible. And certainly I encourage you to find out more. There are links on my Instagram page to different folks who talk more about the tradition of divination and how it relates to marginalized groups. So with that in mind, let's think about what cards will help us this week in the collective. So when I do these tarot readings, my intention is that each person may find something for themselves that helps them gain clarity and move forward in a good way this week. I don't know if I have a right word for that. So let's see what cards can help us as a collective to do that. There's also some astrology this week that I'll try to touch on, some significant transits, and see if we can tie those in. Okay, so the first card we have is the King of Swords reversed. And for this card, this is a court card. The kings often represent individuals and people in our lives, or archetypes of people, or aspects of our own personality. And the king, or master, or emperor, or archetypical male energy of swords is encapsulated here, and swords generally correspond to air, thought, Mercury, things like that. So what we have here is maybe an inability to clearly express our thoughts and feelings. And so that may be feeling like you're going to be in trouble if you speak your mind, feeling like there's something wrong with the system, but maybe I can't clearly articulate what I'm thinking yet. And that actually would make a lot of sense coming on the heels of a full moon in Aquarius, where we're going to be having a lot of expansive thoughts, particularly about the collective, and we may not be able to express those thoughts. A lot of times when we are thinking in new ways about societal structures, the language isn't always there to describe what we think, because language is, of course, a human construct, and it lags behind. So we may not want to use the language that we have, the thoughts that we have, the traditional things we've learned, because we're trying to express a brand new idea. So that could be that it could be on that level of the collective, or it could be personally within an interpersonal relationship, or there could be some our own higher self could be having some new ideas that we are not clear on or not really able to clearly express. So that's what we have going on in the beginning of the week. That looks like it could lead us midweek to some emotional, perhaps, instability. Here we have a counterpoint to the King of Swords. We have the Queen of Cups. The Queen is sort of the archetype of female energy. Again, a court card that could represent self, other, or traditional archetype of person that is a master, is upright. Queen of Cups is generally compassionate, caring, happy, empathetic, and not only master of her emotions. I don't like to use gender, but sort of able to fluidly hold the container of emotion. So when we have that turned upside down, too many emotions are coming, you can't handle them. Someone who you counted on for emotional stability isn't providing that. Someone who is an archetypical female figure in your life, perhaps a mother figure or a sister, is not maybe acting in alignment. Their actions are in alignment with the way that you think they feel. I mean, that's kind of out there. But the idea being that by midweek, the thoughts that are trapped are causing some emotional stagnation as well. Jupiter has been in retrograde, and midweek it enters Aquarius, I believe, in its retrograde state. So, you have some tension between expansive ideas and how they're going to interact with the collective, maybe how we can bring them to fruition. There's the idea of wanting to expand and hold more, but maybe not being able to yet. We haven't grown quite enough, or we don't know what to do. Okay, so the week comes to a close. We see the upright card of Justice. And this is a major arcana card. So generally, I read those as having to do more with soul-related, fundamental elements, and like maybe the everyday nitty gritty of our lives, which sometimes I think more of the minor arcana as pertaining to. So by the end of the week, we could have an epiphany. On Thursday, Mars enters Virgo, and it's going to join Venus there. So we have both polarities of the masculine and feminine archetypical energy residing in the same house of Aquarius, which is a house about, aliens and the collective. So we might get some clarity as to how we want to move forward with our ideas, or there could be some decisions made structurally that make us feel more comfortable about how we're going to take these big ideas of service and make them fit the framework of social justice. This could also mean that you're able to make a clear decision that you feel is ethical in alignment with yourself, or that you see other people around you acting in that way, or there are opportunities to act in alignment, or perhaps maybe there weren't. So I think that comes on the heels of some building tension, and it would seem like there would be some clarity and release by the end of the week with the opportunity to act in alignment. Justice being fairness, but also meaning being able to work in the physical plane in alignment with the higher ideals that you hold. So there you go. There's our cards for this week. I'm going to pull an oracle card from the Airmail Oracle deck as well. Here's a little package. And I've done 2 oracle decks so far. Those are both available in my Etsy shop. The Rockstar Oracle and this one, the Airmail Oracle. So let's see what, really, this is my grandparents speaking, because they wrote the letters that created all the postage that's on this deck. So let's see what our past generation has to say about all this social justice business. Wow. Okay, so seek truth. I love that. So I am actually also, in terms of ancestral work, this is significant to me personally, because this card deck was made through my maternal lineage. My grandmother and grandfather, who sent the letters that comprise the stamps that make up this deck, are my mother's parents. But on my father's side, I am a descendant of Abraham Lincoln. He is my great, 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 great uncle. So up there, 7 or 8 generations up, he and I had the same grandfather in the family tree. But I personally have had many experiences with Abraham Lincoln coming to me as a spiritual guide. And for me, he represents the problematic nature of having both Lincoln and slaveholding families in my direct family tree that I can trace within a few generations. So when I say seek truth, it goes right along with our card justice here. But it also really just resonates that, this is an ongoing journey. This is internal work. The truth that we're seeking is how can we best move through this world in a way that's ethical and in alignment with the world that we want to see. And, as we move further away from the urgency of maybe last summer and the direct application of Black Lives Matter in a lot of people's lives, there may be a fading of the urgency inside of those of us who are still responsible for addressing white supremacy in our own lives. It doesn't have to be that you are a social justice warrior on the outside every day, but in your heart, it's important that you hold these oppositions as both being true. I am a descendant of people who owned slaves, and I'm also someone who would like to see a future where oppression is eliminated. Those things are both true. So those are just some things, those are some lighthearted things to consider this week for this week's reading. And so hopefully you have a wonderful week. Take some of these energies into account. And I hope that you join me again next week for another reading.